CDC officials say some McDonald's quarter pounders could be making people sick with E. coli. At least 49 cases in 10 states have been traced back to the burgers, and sadly, tragically, one person has died from the infection. I want to bring in CBS News correspondent Nancy Chen, who's joining me here in Studio 55 to talk more about this. So the outbreak occurred a couple of days ago. How is McDonald's responding, Nancy?
Well, at this point, most of the people, Vlad, who have reported getting sick have said that they've had the quarter pounder, which is why it's the focus of this investigation right now. And the majority of these cases have been in Colorado and Nebraska. Now, some of the other states where this was reported, though, include Iowa, Kansas, Missouri, Oregon, and Wisconsin. And as you mentioned, this all started from the end of September, with the most recent case October 11th. McDonald's says it has pulled the burger from menus in impacted locations, as well as portions of surrounding areas, and that it has linked a subset of cases to slivered onions sourced from a single supplier, which serves three distribution centers, I should say. Still, the investigation continues to confirm exactly where this is coming from. The company says that they are working with their suppliers to replenish their supply for the quarter pounder in the coming weeks. And in the meantime, all other menu items, they say, including other beef products like the hamburger, the cheeseburger, the Big Mac, they remain unaffected and available, Vlad.
So E. coli is no joke. What kind of symptoms did customers say they experienced?
Yeah, it usually takes 3 to 4 weeks to determine if someone is sick as part of an outbreak. It takes a little while. It's not an immediate reaction. Most people infected with E. coli experience severe stomach cramps, diarrhea, and vomiting. Now, most do recover without treatment after 5 to 7 days, but it can be especially dangerous for people with weakened immune systems. So this is definitely something to keep an eye on.
It's a credit to the CDC that they're actually able to trace those symptoms back to these burgers, because as you say, 3 weeks, you've eaten a lot of things in the 3 weeks since you consumed the infected meat or the infected product, and to be able to trace it back to McDonald's, that sort of gives me a little bit of, makes me feel a little better about how people are thinking about this stuff.
Yeah, there's a lot of questions being asked, and for good reason.
And how it got into that McDonald's, those McDonald's hamburgers.
McDonald's is pulling its popular quarter pounders off the menu in 10 states due to a deadly E. coli outbreak. The CDC says the burgers have been connected to more than 4 dozen infections. At least one person has died and several remain hospitalized. More than half of those infections were reported in Colorado. Joining us now is Darren Detweiler. He's a professor at Northeastern University and a food safety advisor who's written multiple books on the subject. So, Darren, McDonald's says it's linked a subset of cases to slivered onions, but hamburger patties are also being investigated now. Talk to us about how E. coli contaminations like this one actually happen.
Well, first off, E. coli is found in the intestines of cattle, and it usually in the intestines is surrounded by either the meat or the hide. And so if there's cross-contamination there at slaughter, this is where we get E. coli into the product. If we're talking about produce, what we've seen, especially when you look at lettuce or other produce, is that it's contamination from downstream of the cattle operations. So when you have E. coli in food, essentially the only kind of proper kill step is that of cooking. And whereas we can cook the hamburger patties, in fact, McDonald's had an outbreak of E. coli back in the 80s, and they instituted incredibly effective policies and procedures and technologies to make sure their hamburger patties were cooked well enough and long enough to the right temperature to be an effective kill step. But, most people don't want their lettuce, tomato, pickle, and onions on a hamburger to be cooked. So you don't have the ability to cook and kill that pathogen for those items. So it takes testing and auditing and validation that would take place much earlier in the cycle to prevent contaminated ingredients such as these fresh produce items to even get to the facilities and franchises.
Well, and there's a question that we're hearing from folks. They want to know if there's any way to know if their food's contaminated with E. coli.
No, it is not visible. You cannot see it or smell it or taste it. The only way to tell if it's contaminated is through testing. And, testing takes a little while for results to come back. That's why it's imperative that companies are testing frequently, they're testing early, and they're testing these products as effectively as they can, not just resting solely on the assumptions or the reputation of their suppliers. So it sounds like this may be from a single supplier that supplied those ingredients within that region. There'll be some investigations into determining is that actually the source and what caused this to take place in the first place.
And people also want to know about the symptoms and the concerns that are associated with an infection. How long before symptoms start to develop after coming into contact with E. coli?
It really varies. A lot of times it varies on the age or the status of the immune system of the consumer who gets sick. While there's no one perfect number to give you, the more vulnerable victims, those who are very young or elderly, those with a compromised immune system or who are pregnant, are the ones who usually show the symptoms first or have enough symptoms such that it persists long enough that they want to seek medical attention. Obviously, in this case, the one gentleman from Colorado who died is elderly, but in many cases, we typically see that it is, again, the very young and the elderly and those who are pregnant or with a compromised immune system that show symptoms early. Those symptoms are everything from nausea to bloody diarrhea to, if it gets worse, the idea of a decrease in renal output. You're not urinating enough. There are a variety of symptoms. They differ between pathogen and from person to person. But if you feel as if you have a stomach flu or a stomach bug or it was, quote unquote, something you ate, most people don't do this, but you should see your doctor. You should get tested and see if it is something that needs to have medical attention. Also, the idea of being able to collect that information in terms of where did you eat, what is the source of this, because if it's part of a bigger outbreak like we see in this case, it will help investigators and health officials try to make sure they can adequately and quickly determine the point and bring an end to an outbreak such that we decrease the number of potential liabilities and minimize the harm on consumers within our communities.
All right, Darren Detweiler, thank you.
The FDA is looking into two possibilities as a source of an E. coli outbreak linked to McDonald's Quarter Pounder burgers. At least one person has died from the illness. The company announced Wednesday 1 out of 5 restaurants are not offering the Quarter Pounder. To give you an idea of scale, McDonald's sells about 500,000 of them each week. CBS News Colorado reporter Karen Morfitt has the latest.
Federal health officials say a fast-moving E. coli outbreak is linked to McDonald's Quarter Pounder hamburgers. Already 49 people have reported being sick across 10 states. 26 of those cases are right here in Colorado. While we know that some of those reports in other states can also be linked back to restaurants here in Colorado, we don't know of any specific locations where people are getting sick. The state health department is not releasing that information at this time. Now, that includes the Denver metro area, as well as our mountain towns and rural areas of Colorado on the western slope, all have restaurants that are impacted. We also know that the western slope is where an older gentleman died from this illness. Now, McDonald's says their initial findings from their investigation with the CDC point to 2 ingredients that could be the source of contamination. They're first looking at slivered onions that are specific to the Quarter Pounder hamburger, but again, they are also looking at the beef patties as a possible source of contamination. Both are specific to this one menu item. Already, McDonald's says they have pulled both the slivered onions and beef patties from affected restaurants. Karen Morfitt, CBS News.
More fast food chains are taking raw onions off the menu after a deadly E. coli outbreak linked to McDonald's Quarter Pounders. The company says that a single grower in California appears to be the source of the contamination. Nancy Chan is here with the latest on this story. Nancy, good morning.
Tony, good morning to you. The fallout continues from this outbreak that has killed one person and sickened dozens. The parent company for Taco Bell, Pizza Hut, and KFC says it's proactively removed fresh onions from menus at select locations after McDonald's named them as the likely source. McDonald's said yesterday a California supplier, Taylor Farms, was the source of the fresh onions used in the affected burgers. Earlier this week, Taylor Farms recalled whole and diced yellow onions from its Colorado facility for potential E. coli contamination. And what it says is an abundance of caution. The FDA and CDC continue to investigate the outbreak. In a statement to CBS News, Taylor Farms says it tests products and has found no traces of E. coli. Meanwhile, Quarter Pounders have been pulled from 20% of McDonald's nationwide, and more than a dozen people are suing the company after reporting getting sick, Nate.
Nancy, thank you.